Well, we're here in our home, our new home, El Salvador, and where everything is looking great. The economy is up sharply. They made Bitcoin legal tender, and they're benefiting massively as a result. GDP up 10.3%, tourism up over 100%, employment up 7%, new business up 12%, exports up 17%, internal revenue up 37%, violent crime down 95%. So, this is an interesting decade, an interesting century where the U.S. is kind of on the way down, and El Salvador in the region is on the way up. And FTX and FTT, which is their token, and Alameda, which is kind of the hedge fund, Alameda Research, that they created back in 2017. So Sam Bankman-Fried came out of a company called Jane Capital, and he comes from the very shadowy world, the very shady world of high-frequency trading and kind of the shadow banking system and the market making that's done kind of in a gray regulatory zone. And there's a lot of these firms that exist on the periphery. There's a lot of debate whether they're actually engaged in lawful activities or not. But that's where he came from. So he came out of Jane Capital. He started Alameda Research, which is another one of these market making, high frequency trading, arbitrage, chop shops that are very fringe in terms of whether they're legal or not legal. They exist kind of on the periphery. And he was engaged in a lot of skullduggery over there at Alameda. Then they decided to start their own exchange, FTX, and they lobbied very hard in the Bahamas, where they felt that they would get very little regulatory oversight. They went ahead and they bought 10% of IEX, which is another one of these shady peripheral exchanges, to give themselves regulatory legitimacy. They then floated a token called FTT, which is part of the whole scam token world that we've been talking about for a number of years, whether it's Ethereum or Cardano or FTT or XRP. These are just scam tokens. And he used that and listed it on other scammy exchanges to create a price, and then using that as collateral to buy assets like real estate in the Bahamas. And now, as all Ponzi schemes eventually do, they run out of kind of runway and they crash and burn. So it is similar to Bernie Madoff in that respect. It's also similar to the 2008 financial crisis, where Wall Street spun out of thin air all these derivative contracts, and they created this multi-trillion-dollar Ponzi scheme that blew up finally in 2008, and with the help of the Fed and central banks to bail out all the crooked bankers once again. So there's a lot of similarities to that. There's similarities to the S&L crisis of the late 1970s, early 1980s. I should note that the S&L crisis, which is a similar crisis of using federal money to backstop a fraud, William K. Black, who was a regulator at the time, he put 1,000 bankers in jail. And we haven't seen anybody with that kind of rigorous regulatory oversight in 40 years. There hasn't been any rigorous financial oversight in the United States and around the world. And if you're not going to enforce laws, you're inviting these problems. So the regulators have really some answers that they need to fill in. And so it's kind of a continuation, Daniela, of multi-decade scammy fraud banking nightmare. And there's lots of regulations, but you have to enforce the regulations. The SEC doesn't enforce the regulations. Now, one of the interesting things that have come out of all this is that you've got folks like the Ethereum Foundation and lobbying groups like Andreessen Horowitz and FTX really working the regulators in Washington. Their goal was to move all regulatory oversight from the SEC to the CFTC, where they felt that they had a more captured regulator. And that was the big goal of all of their regulatory malfeasance or bribery, or however you want to position that and talk about it. But that's been going on for a number of years. And to that end, the Silicon Valley scam coin fraudsters like Andreessen Horowitz with Solana, which is a scam, they're trying to move all oversight away from the SEC to the CFTC. So the regulators are clearly implicated. I would say it's part and parcel of a bigger picture where the U.S. economy is basically a kleptocracy at this point of scammy bankers, scammy politicians, the scammy media outlets all colluding to defraud people.
Right.
And the results are quite ugly.